I'm Rebecca Chen, 32, and I've been fighting lupus for 8 years while building my freelance graphic design business from my home office. Last month, at what should have been a celebration of my remission milestone, my sister Claire looked me dead in the eye and said, "Your illness makes everyone uncomfortable. Becca, maybe you should just stay home from family gatherings." The words hit harder than any flare-up I'd ever experienced. Here I was, finally stable enough to rejoin life, and my own sister wanted me hidden away. But as I sat in my car afterward, tears streaming down my face, I noticed something that would change everything. Claire's husband, Marcus, climbing out of a red sedan that definitely wasn't his truck, kissing a woman who definitely wasn't my sister. The betrayal I felt in that moment wasn't just about what I'd witnessed. It was about years of being treated like a burden while protecting secrets I didn't even know I was keeping. But this time, I wouldn't stay silent. I still remember the weight of that medical bracelet they clasped around my wrist during my first hospital stay. The plastic felt cold against my skin, and the words lupus, autoimmune disorder, seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent lights. I was 24, fresh out of college, ready to conquer the world with my art degree and boundless energy. Instead, found myself learning medical terminology I never wanted to know. The joint pain had started, gradually just stiffness in the mornings that I attributed to my new desk job at a design firm. Then came the fatigue that sleep couldn't cure, the mysterious rashes that appeared and disappeared without warning. And finally, the fever that landed me in the emergency room on a Tuesday night in October. Systemic lupus erythematosus, Dr. Martinez had said, her voice gentle but matter-of-fact. It's an autoimmune condition where your body's immune system attacks your own tissues and organs. Claire had been there that day, holding my hand as the doctor explained how my life would need to change. She'd driven me to the hospital when I called, panicked and shaking from pain. I remember her squeezing my fingers when Dr. Martinez talked about flare-ups, medications, and the unpredictable nature of the disease. "We'll figure this out together," Claire had whispered, and I believed her completely. Those first few months, she really did try. She researched anti-inflammatory diets, bought me heating pads and compression gloves, even came to some of my doctor appointments. But I could see something shifting in her eyes during those visits, a mix of pity and discomfort that grew stronger each time. I had to cancel plans or leave early because of fatigue. The design firm let me go 6 months after my diagnosis. They couched it in corporate speak about restructuring and new directions, but I knew the truth. The unpredictable sick days, the reduced productivity during flare-ups, the accommodations I needed had become a liability. That's when the family dynamics really began to fracture. While I was learning to navigate a new reality of medications and limitations, Claire was thriving. She'd just gotten engaged to Marcus, landed a promotion at her marketing firm, and suddenly became the family's golden success story. My parents, terrified by my diagnosis and uncertain how to help, naturally gravitated toward their healthy, achieving daughter. I tried not to notice how conversations shifted when I entered rooms, or how family gatherings began to revolve around Claire's accomplishments while my struggles were met with awkward silence. My mother would ask about my health in the same tone she might use to inquire about the weather, polite but distant, as if my illness was something happening to someone else entirely. The medical bracelet became a symbol of everything that had changed. I eventually stopped wearing it, but I kept it in my jewelry box as a reminder of the day my life split in two, before and after. The first freelance contract I signed was for a small bakery's logo. Design $50 and a week's worth of work that I stretched into every spare moment between doctor appointments and medication adjustments. I framed that contract and hung it above my makeshift desk in the corner of my studio apartment. It represented something I desperately needed, proof that I could still be useful, still create, still contribute. Working from home became my sanctuary and my prison. On good days, when the joint pain was manageable and my mind was clear, I could lose myself in color palettes and typography for hours. I discovered I had a talent for understanding what small businesses needed: authentic, warm designs that spoke to their communities. My client base grew slowly but steadily, built on referrals and genuine relationships rather than corporate networking events I could no longer reliably attend. The unpredictability of lupus meant I had to restructure everything about how I worked. I learned to batch my creative work during high-energy periods, to build buffer time into every deadline, and to communicate honestly with clients about my limitations. Most were understanding, even appreciative of my transparency. But there were always those who heard chronic illness and immediately looked for someone more reliable. My apartment became my universe in ways I hadn't anticipated. I invested in good lighting for my workspace, filled the windowsills with plants that didn't mind my irregular watering schedule, and created an environment that supported both my health and my creativity. On flare-up days, when leaving the house felt impossible, I could still feel productive, still feel like myself, but the isolation was taking its toll. Claire's visits became less frequent, and when she did come by, seemed uncomfortable with the medical equipment scattered around the pill organizer on the kitchen counter, the heating pad permanently stationed on the couch, the stack of medical bills on my desk. She'd suggest we meet at restaurants instead, places where my illness could remain invisible. Family dinners became exercises in careful navigation. I'd arrive with energy I'd been saving for days, put on makeup to hide the fatigue, and try to participate in conversations that increasingly revolved around achievements I couldn't match. Claire would talk about her latest campaign at work, her wedding planning, her marathon training. I'd mention landing a new client or completing a particularly challenging design, but somehow my accomplishments felt diminished in comparison. My parents began treating me like fragile china, speaking in hushed tones about my health when they thought I couldn't hear. They meant well, but their overprotectiveness felt suffocating. They'd suggest I take it easy when I mentioned taking on a challenging project, or worry aloud about me overdoing it when I expressed excitement about anything. The contrast with how they treated Claire was stark. She was encouraged to dream big, take risks, push herself. I was encouraged to rest, to not push too hard, to accept limitations. Without meaning to, they were teaching me to shrink. But that first contract remained on my wall, a reminder that even in the shadows, I was building something meaningful, even if my family couldn't see it yet. Claire's college graduation photo dominated the mantelpiece in my parents' living room, a professional portrait where she looked radiant in her cap and gown, clutching her marketing degree like a trophy. Her smile was perfect, her future bright and uncomplicated. My own graduation photo, taken just 2 years earlier, had been quietly relocated to a bookshelf in the hallway, partially obscured by a plant. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, but I tried not to dwell on it. After all, Claire deserved recognition for her achievements. She'd graduated summa cum laude, landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm right out of college, and was dating Marcus Thompson, a high school English teacher who seemed genuinely devoted to her. From the outside, her life looked like something from a lifestyle magazine. Marcus was everything parents dream of in a son-in-law stable: educated, kind to their daughter, and eager to be part of the family. He was tall and earnest, with the patient demeanor of someone who spent his days working with teenagers, coached the school's debate team, and volunteered at the local literacy center on weekends. When he proposed to Claire at Christmas dinner 2 years after my diagnosis, the entire family erupted in celebration. I was happy for her, genuinely, but watching the way my parents fawned over their engagement, the way they immediately began planning an elaborate wedding, the way every conversation seemed to orbit around Claire's perfect life, it was hard not to feel invisible by comparison. Claire thrived on the attention. She'd always been the more social of us, the one who could work a room and make everyone feel like her best friend. But after my diagnosis, as I became less available for family events and social gatherings, she seemed to expand to fill the space I'd left behind. She became the daughter who could handle anything, who would never disappoint, who would give them grandchildren and holiday gatherings and all the normal milestones they'd feared losing when I got sick. The wedding planning consumed 18 months of family conversations. Claire approached it with the same intensity she brought to her marketing campaigns, creating spreadsheets and mood boards and timelines. She included me in the process, asking me to design the invitations and programs, which I appreciated. But it was clear that my role was supportive, not central. Rebecca designed these, Claire would tell people. holding up the elegant invitations I'd spent weeks perfecting. She's so talented, but somehow, even her praise felt like patting a pet, affectionate but distant, acknowledging a skill while diminishing the person behind it. Marcus seemed to genuinely like me, which made things more complicated. He'd ask about my work with real interest, remember details from previous conversations, and include me in discussions even when Claire seemed ready to move on. Sometimes I caught him looking at me with what seemed like concern, as if he could see the growing distance between me and the rest of the family. The wedding itself was everything Claire had dreamed of: elegant, flawless, photographed extensively. For social media, I was a bridesmaid, of course, though I spent most of the reception managing a lupus flare that had started the morning of the ceremony. I smiled through the pain, danced when I could, and left early with a migraine that lasted 3 days. But the photos that ended up framed and displayed showed only the perfect moments: Claire, radiant in her dress, Marcus gazing at her adoringly, my parents beaming with pride. I appeared in a few background shots, but somehow I looked like a guest rather than family, present but separate from the joy surrounding me. The first time I noticed the jewelry, Claire was showing off a diamond tennis bracelet at Mom's birthday. Dinner, the stones caught the restaurant's candlelight as she gestured, talking about her latest client presentation. It was beautiful, expensive looking, and completely at odds with what I knew about Marcus's teacher salary and Claire's entry-level marketing position. Anniversary gift, she'd said when Mom complimented it, but something in her tone felt rehearsed. Marcus had looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and changing the subject to the dessert menu. Teachers in our district made decent money, but not tennis bracelet money. I knew because I'd designed promotional materials for the school district's fundraising campaign the year before. The salary ranges were public information, and Marcus, even with his coaching stipend, wasn't pulling in 6 figures over the following months. I started noticing other things. Claire's handbags got more expensive, her clothes more designer. She joined an exclusive gym, started getting her hair done at a salon that charged more than I made in a week. When I casually asked about her apparent raise, she gave vague answers about bonuses and smart investments, but it was the way she talked about Marcus that really caught my attention. The adoring wife act she performed for our parents felt increasingly forced. She'd interrupt him more often, dismiss his opinions about movies or restaurants, and make subtle digs about his profession that she tried to pass off as teasing. Marcus thinks we should save for a house, she'd said once, rolling her eyes. But honestly, with his teacher mentality, we'd be living in a starter home forever. Sometimes you have to think bigger. Marcus had flinched at that, and I'd felt genuinely sorry for him. He was a good man who clearly loved her, but love wasn't enough to bridge whatever gap was growing between them. The change in Claire was subtle, but unmistakable. She'd always been ambitious, but now there was an edge to it, a restlessness that seemed to spill over into irritation with everyone around her. She complained more about her job, about Marcus's lack of drive, about our parents' old-fashioned ideas, and increasingly about me. Rebecca can't understand. It became her go-to phrase when discussing anything related to career advancement or financial goals. She's never had to think about supporting a family or building a real future. The dismissal stung every time, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was just stressed about money, about keeping up appearances. Maybe the expensive items were gifts from wealthy clients or lucky finds at consignment shops. Maybe I was reading too much into normal marital adjustments. But then there were the phone calls she'd take in private, stepping away from family gatherings to whisper into her phone. It's the way she'd guard her purse, keeping it close and checking her phone constantly. The expensive lingerie I glimpsed when she was getting ready at my parents' house for a work event. Intricate, beautiful pieces that seemed like overkill for networking with marketing colleagues. Marcus started looking increasingly strained. The easy smile that had won over our family became more forced. He'd show up to family dinners looking tired, would zone out during conversations, and seemed to be walking on eggshells around Claire. When he tried to contribute to discussions about their future, she'd shut him down with practiced efficiency. Marcus doesn't really understand the business world, she'd say, usually while he was sitting right there, Teaching is so different. From the real marketplace, I began to wonder if the perfect marriage everyone celebrated was crumbling behind closed doors. But Claire was so skilled at managing perceptions, so good at presenting the image everyone wanted to see. That questioning, it felt like betraying not just her, but the entire family's investment in her success story. After all, if Claire's perfect, life wasn't actually perfect. What did that say about the rest of us? The blood test results were the best I'd seen in 8 years. Dr. Martinez had actually smiled when she reviewed the numbers with me. My inflammation markers were down, my kidney function was stable, and for the first time since my diagnosis, we were using the word remission. This doesn't mean you're cured, she'd cautioned, but I could hear the optimism in her voice. Lupus is unpredictable, but right now, today, your body is responding beautifully to the treatment protocol. How are you feeling? I felt alive. The crushing fatigue that had been my constant companion for years had lifted. I was sleeping through the night, waking up refreshed instead of exhausted. My joints moved without the familiar ache, and my mind felt clear and sharp. I've been able to take on more complex design projects, had energy for evening walks, could even contemplate going out to dinner without worrying about having to leave early. The test results were more than medical data. They were permission to reclaim parts of my life I'd mourned as lost. I called my parents first, barely able to contain my excitement. Mom cried when I told her, and Dad's voice got thick with emotion. They suggested celebrating as a family, maybe dinner at that Italian place we used to love before my diagnosis. Made unpredictable restaurant visits too stressful. We should include Claire and Marcus, Mom had said. They've been so worried about you too. That should have been my first warning. Claire hadn't been worried about me, she'd been inconvenienced by me, but I was too happy to parse the difference. The dinner was set for Saturday night. I bought a new dress for the occasion, something I hadn't done in years. I wanted to look healthy, vibrant, like the person I was becoming again. Spent extra time on my makeup, chose jewelry that caught the light, styled my hair in a way that required energy I'd finally regained. Walking into the restaurant felt triumphant. I wasn't scanning for the nearest bathroom, wasn't calculating how long I could stay before the fatigue hit, wasn't mentally preparing excuses for an early exit. I was just a woman having dinner with her family, celebrating good news. But the celebration felt stilted from the beginning. Dad kept asking if I was sure I should be drinking wine with my medications. Mom scrutinized my face for signs of fatigue every few minutes. And Claire seemed actively annoyed by the attention, focused on my health improvement. It's great that you're feeling better, she said when Dad raised his glass in a toast. But remission isn't permanent, right? I mean, you'll still need to be careful. The comment deflated some of my joy, but I tried to stay positive. That's true, but for now, I get to feel normal again. I can start doing things I've missed. What kinds of things? Marcus asked, and his interest seemed genuine. Well, I'd love to come to more family gatherings. Maybe host Thanksgiving this year. Or help with Christmas decorating. I've missed so much. That's when Claire's expression shifted to something I couldn't immediately identify. Annoyance? Panic. She set down her wine glass with more force than necessary. Actually, Becca, we need to talk about that. The restaurant suddenly felt too quiet around our table. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, and Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Talk about what? I asked, though something cold was already settling in my stomach. Claire took a breath, composed herself, and delivered the words that would shatter everything. Your illness makes everyone uncomfortable. When you're at family events, everyone's walking on eggshells, worried you might have a flare-up or need to leave early. It changes the whole dynamic. Maybe you should just stay home from family gatherings. The silence that followed felt infinite. I stared at my sister, waiting for her to take it back, to say she was joking, to explain that she'd misspoken. Instead, she looked relieved, as if she'd finally said something that had been weighing on her for years. Claire, Dad started, but she held up her hand. I'm just being honest. Everyone thinks it, but no one wants to say it. Rebecca's condition makes everything about her, even when she's not trying to. It's exhausting. I felt like I was drowning in plain sight, surrounded by people who could save me but were choosing not to. The test results in my purse, the proof, of my improvement. My hope for rejoining the world suddenly felt like cruel jokes. I sat in my car in the restaurant parking lot, hands shaking as I tried to process what had just happened. The keys felt foreign in my palm, and I couldn't seem to coordinate the simple motion of starting the engine. 8 years of being patient, understanding, accommodating, and this was what my family really thought of me. The tears came in waves, not the gentle tears of sadness, but the harsh, choking sobs of someone who had just realized they'd been living a lie. Every family gathering I'd attended, every conversation I'd participated in, every moment I'd thought I was welcome it had all been an act of tolerance, not love. Claire's words kept echoing. Your illness makes everyone uncomfortable. Not just her, everyone. My parents, who'd driven me to the restaurant tonight to celebrate my remission. My extended family, who'd sent cards and flowers during my worst flare-ups. All of them, apparently, just waiting for me to remove myself. From their lives, I fumbled for my phone, thinking I might call my friend Sarah, the one person who'd never made me feel like a burden. But as I scrolled through my contacts, I realized how small my world had become. Most of my friendships had faded during the early years of my diagnosis, when I'd had to cancel plans repeatedly and gradually stopped making new ones. The isolation hit me like a physical blow. I really was alone. I was wiping my eyes with a restaurant napkin when movement caught my attention. A red sedan was pulling into the parking lot, and something about it seemed familiar. The car parked 3 spaces away from me, and I watched. As a man got out, tall, familiar build. Wearing a jacket I recognized. Marcus, but Marcus had left the restaurant with Claire 20 minutes ago. He'd driven their blue pickup truck, which I'd seen pull out of the lot while I was still sitting here, paralyzed by shock. Why was he back? And why was he driving a different car? I ducked lower in my seat, instinctively hiding, even though my windows were tinted. Marcus walked around to the passenger side of the sedan and opened the door. A woman stepped out, brunette, petite, wearing a dress that hugged her curves. She was beautiful in a way that made my breath catch, and when Marcus pulled her into his arms, when he kissed her with the passion of someone who'd been waiting all day for this moment, I understood exactly why he was there. My phone was in my hand before I consciously decided to use it. I took 3 photos through my windshield, my hands steadier now that I had a purpose. The first caught them embracing, the second showed their faces clearly as they pulled apart, and the third captured Marcus's hand on the small of her back. As they walked toward the restaurant entrance together, the betrayal I felt wasn't just about Marcus cheating on Claire. It was about the cosmic unfairness of it all. Here I was, devastated by my sister's cruelty, feeling like the family reject. And the golden couple everyone celebrated was built on a lie. Claire, who'd just humiliated me for having a chronic illness, was married to a man who was cheating on her with someone who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. I sat there for another 10 minutes. Watching the restaurant entrance, waiting for them to come back out. When they did, they were holding hands, looking relaxed and happy in a way I'd never seen Marcus look with Claire. The woman, his affair partner, was laughing at something he'd said, and Marcus was looking at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world. As they got back into the red sedan, I made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I wasn't going to pretend I hadn't seen this. I wasn't going to protect Claire the way I'd protected everyone else's feelings for years. I wasn't going to be the family member who suffered in silence while everyone else got to live their messy, complicated, authentic lives. For the first time in 8 years, felt powerful. I started my car and drove home, no longer crying. The photos were safely stored on my phone, and with them, everything had changed. Claire thought my illness made everyone uncomfortable. Wait until she found out what her husband's affair was going to do to the family dynamic. I bought a small notebook. The next morning, nothing fancy, just a plain composition book from the drugstore. On the first page, I wrote Marcus Thompson and the date, then began documenting everything I could remember about what I'd witnessed. The time, the location, the red sedan's license plate number that I'd managed to glimpse, and a description of the woman. It felt strange investigating my brother-in-law like he was a client project. But after years of having my reality dismissed and my perceptions questioned, I needed evidence. I needed proof that couldn't be explained away or rationalized. The woman in the photos was striking early 30s, professional but artistic in her style, With the kind of effortless confidence I envied, I'd managed to capture her face clearly in one of the shots, which gave me hope that I could identify her if I tried. In our digital age, everyone left traces. I started with social media, using every platform I could think of. I searched for women connected to Marcus's workplace, looked through the followers of his rarely updated Instagram account, and checked the Facebook pages of his colleagues. Teaching was a small community, and most educators seemed to know each other across different schools. It took 3 days of careful searching, but I found her, Sarah Martinez. Not Martinez like my doctor, but close enough to make me do a double take. Her LinkedIn profile identified her as an art gallery curator, and her Instagram was full of beautiful photos of art installations, wine tastings, and cultural events. She looked sophisticated, accomplished, and completely unaware that she was dating a married man. Or maybe she did know. Maybe that was part of the appeal. Her gallery, I discovered, was downtown, specializing in contemporary local artists. The kind of place Marcus might visit if he was expanding his cultural horizons. Or if he was trying to impress someone new. Her posts suggested she was passionate about her work, traveled occasionally for exhibitions, got a group of close friends who appeared regularly in her photos. What struck me most was how vibrant she looked in her pictures. There was an energy to her that reminded me of how I'd felt during my best days in remission alive, engaged, ready for anything. The kind of energy Claire used to have before whatever had soured her in recent years. I began mapping Marcus's schedule, using information I'd gathered from years of family dinners where Claire complained about his commitments. He coached debate. Team on Wednesdays had parent conferences on Thursday evenings and usually graded papers at home on weekends. But there were gaps times when Claire mentioned he was at school for something, or meeting with colleagues that seemed vague even by teacher standards. The red sedan bothered me. It wasn't registered to either of them. I checked the public records online. It suggested either it belonged to Sarah or Marcus was being even more careful about covering his tracks than I'd initially thought. I drove past Sarah's gallery twice, not stopping, just getting a feel for the area. It was in the arts district, surrounded by cafes and boutiques, the kind of neighborhood where holding hands with someone wouldn't attract attention. It's perfect for clandestine meetings. On my third reconnaissance trip, I saw the red sedan parked on the street outside the gallery. My heart rate spiked as I realized Marcus was inside, probably with Sarah. He's probably thinking he was completely safe from discovery. I parked a block away and waited, my notebook open on the passenger seat. 20 minutes later, they emerged together, walking close but not touching. It's professional distance, the kind maintained by people who are very aware of appearances. They stood talking outside the gallery for several minutes, and I managed to take more photos with my phone's zoom lens. This time, Marcus looked different than he had at the restaurant parking lot. More nervous, checking his watch frequently, glancing around as if he expected to be caught. Sarah seemed to be reassuring him about something, her hand briefly touching his arm before they separated. I followed his route home, staying far enough back to avoid detection. He drove straight to the house he shared with Claire, parked in their driveway, and sat in his truck for several minutes before going inside. Even from a distance, I could see the weight on his shoulders, the way he seemed to brace himself before. Facing his wife that night, I organized everything I'd learned into my notebook. Dates, times, locations, observations. It's the beginning of a pattern that painted a clear picture of deception. But as I reviewed my notes, I realized I was facing a moral dilemma I hadn't anticipated. What exactly did I plan to do with this information? Went to Sarah's gallery on a Thursday afternoon, telling myself I was just browsing. The space was beautiful, high ceilings, white walls, carefully curated pieces that seemed to tell stories about the human experience. Sarah was behind the counter, helping a couple understand the provenance of a particular painting, her passion for the work evident in every gesture. She was even more striking in person than in the photos. There was an authenticity to her that I found immediately appealing, a warmth that made the gallery feel welcoming rather than intimidating. When she approached me after the couple left, her smile was genuine. "Is there anything particular you're looking for today?" she asked. And I realized I hadn't prepared for this moment at all. "I'm a graphic designer," I said, which was true. I'm always interested in seeing how artists approach visual storytelling. Her eyes lit up. Oh, how wonderful. We actually have several pieces that explore the intersection of commercial and fine art. Are you local? We spent the next hour talking about art design and the creative community in our city. Sarah was intelligent, thoughtful, and surprisingly easy to talk to. She showed me pieces that aligned with my interests, asked insightful questions about my work, and seemed genuinely interested in my perspective as someone who worked in commercial art. I learned that she'd moved here 3 years ago from Portland, drawn by the emerging art scene and the opportunity to curate for a gallery that supported local artists. She was passionate about making art accessible, about breaking down the barriers that made galleries feel exclusive or intimidating. I want people to feel like art is part of their lives, not something they observe from a distance, she said. And I found myself nodding in agreement. It was only when she mentioned having dinner plans that I realized how much time had passed, and that I still didn't know how to broach the real reason I was there. I should let you get ready, I said, though every instinct told me to stay longer, to continue this conversation that had made me feel more intellectually stimulated than I had in months. Actually, Sarah said, checking her watch, my dinner companion is running late. Would you like to grab coffee across the street? I'd love to hear more about your design work. The coffee shop was busy enough to provide cover for a more personal conversation, but intimate enough that I could speak quietly. As we settled into a corner table, I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrible. Sarah, I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how to do it gently. Her expression shifted immediately, the openness replaced by wariness. Okay, I know about Marcus Thompson. The color drained from her face. She set down her coffee cup with trembling hands and stared at me for a long moment. Who are you? She whispered. I'm Rebecca Chen. Marcus is married to my sister. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. Sarah's breathing became shallow, and I could see her processing what this meant, not just for her, but for everything she thought she knew about her relationship with Marcus. He told me he was divorced, she said finally, her voice barely audible. He said the papers were being finalized, that he was just waiting for it to be official before he could be public about us. My heart broke for her in that moment. Whatever. I'd expected to find anger, defiance, knowing complicity wasn't this raw vulnerability, this obvious devastation. They're not divorced, I said gently. They're not even separated. They live together. My family just had dinner with both of them last week. Sarah put her head in her hands. Oh God, I'm the other woman. I'm everything I swore I'd never be. I reached across the table and touched her arm. You didn't know? That's not your fault. But I should have known, she said, lifting her head to look at me with eyes bright with unshed tears. There were signs. I was always careful about when we could see each other. He never let me call him at home. He said it was because of the divorce proceedings, because things were complicated. She told me everything then, how they'd met at a gallery opening 6 months ago, how Marcus had been charming and attentive, claiming to be recently separated and looking for a fresh start. How he'd courted her slowly, respectfully, building a relationship that felt genuine and meaningful. He said he was a teacher, that he coached debate, that he wanted to expand his cultural horizons after feeling trapped in a marriage that had grown stale, Sarah continued. He talked about wanting to travel, to experience art, to be with someone who shared his intellectual interests. It was clear that Marcus had crafted a persona specifically designed to appeal to Sarah's sensitive, cultured, emotionally available. Everything he apparently wasn't with Claire. I fell for him completely, she admitted. I thought I'd found someone special, someone worth waiting for while he sorted out his divorce. By the time Sarah finished her story, I understood that she was as much a victim of Marcus's deception as anyone else. She'd been manipulated by someone who understood exactly what she wanted to hear, who'd used her own integrity against her. After leaving Sarah at the coffee shop, devastated but grateful for the truth, I found myself thinking about patterns. Claire's cruel dismissal of me, Marcus's elaborate deception, my parents' willingness to enable it all. These weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of something deeper, older, more systematic. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to my parents' house and asked to look through the old family photos and letters stored in the basement. Mom seemed surprised but pleased by my interest in family history. I've been thinking about how families work, I told her, which was true enough about how we learn to relate to each other. The basement was a treasure trove of documentation photo albums dating back to my grandparents' generation. Boxes of letters, even some old diaries that various family members had kept over the years. I spent hours going through everything, looking for clues about how our family had learned to handle secrets, conflict, and inconvenient truths. What I found was disturbing in its consistency. My grandmother's letters to her sister, dating from the 1960s, revealed a pattern of covering up my grandfather's drinking problem. "We don't discuss Henry's difficulties outside the family," she'd written. "The children don't need to know how bad things really are." There were references to family gatherings where everyone pretended everything was normal, where problems were smoothed over rather than addressed. My father's sister, Aunt Margaret, apparently had an affair in the 1980s that nearly destroyed her marriage. But according to the letters I found, the family's response wasn't to support her through counseling or help her address whatever was driving her behavior. Instead, they'd helped her cover it up, maintain appearances, and pretend it had never happened. Margaret made a mistake, but she's learned from it. My grandmother had written to my mother, "The important thing is that no one outside the family knows. These things happen, but they don't need to become public knowledge." Even my parents' own relationship had been built on layers of careful image management. I found love letters from their courtship that revealed Dad had been engaged to someone else when he met Mom. But instead of being honest about the messy reality of changing partners, they'd crafted a story about growing apart from his previous fiancé and finding true love with each other. The pattern was clear. Our family didn't deal with problems, buried them, reframed them, or designated someone to be responsible for making them invisible. And when that didn't work, we identified a scapegoat, someone whose problems were acceptable to discuss because they made everyone else look better by comparison. I'd been that scapegoat since my diagnosis. My illness was the family problem that could be acknowledged because it was medical, unavoidable. And most importantly, it wasn't anyone else's fault. It allowed everyone to feel sympathetic while avoiding examination of their own issues. Claire's transformation from supportive sister to family prosecutor made sense in this context. She'd needed me to be the problem so that her own problems, her marriage, her financial pressures, her growing dissatisfaction with her life could remain hidden. My illness was convenient. I gave the family someone to worry about other than the golden child who was supposed to have everything figured out. But now I had evidence that Claire's perfect life was as much a facade as everything else in our family history. Marcus's affair wasn't just a betrayal of their marriage. It was a crack in the carefully maintained image that everyone had invested in. I found one more document that night that changed everything. A letter my great-grandmother had written to my grandmother in 1943 during World War II. Her son, my grandfather's brother, had been having an affair with a married woman whose husband was overseas. When the community found out, instead of supporting him through the consequences, the family had ostracized him completely. "We cannot be associated with this scandal," my great-grandmother had written. "Robert has brought shame on the family name, and we must distance ourselves from his choices. Some mistakes are too public to forgive." The cruelty of it took my breath away. A young man, probably lonely and scared during wartime, had made a human mistake and been completely abandoned by his family for it. There was no mention of him in any family records after 1943. He'd been erased, edited out of the family story as if he'd never existed. I realized that our family had two responses to problems: cover them up if possible, or completely excise the person causing them if not. I'd been living in the liminal space between these options for 8 years, tolerated because my illness could be managed, but increasingly pushed toward erasure as I became more inconvenient. Claire's demand that I stay away from family gatherings wasn't just cruel, it was the family pattern playing out again. I was being prepared for excision, gently at first, then more forcefully as I failed to cooperate with my own marginalization. But this time, I had something my great-great-uncle Robert hadn't. Information that could disrupt the entire system. Marcus's affair was exactly the kind of scandal the family would normally rush to cover up, especially since it threatened Claire's status as the success story everyone needed her to be. The question was whether I wanted to use that information to protect myself or to finally force the family to confront their own dysfunction. As I packed up the letters and photos, noticed my mother watching me from the basement stairs. "Find anything interesting?" she asked. "Family patterns?" I said. "We're really good at pretending problems don't exist, aren't we?" She came down the stairs and sat beside me on the old couch where I'd been reading. "Every family has secrets, Rebecca. The important thing is maintaining relationships, even when those relationships are built on lies. Sometimes lies protect people," she said quietly. "Sometimes the truth does more harm than good." I looked at her and saw a woman who'd spent decades managing other people's realities, smoothing over conflicts, maintaining the careful balance that kept everyone pretending to be happy. "What if the lies are protecting the wrong people, Mom?" She was quiet for a long moment. "What do you mean?" I almost told her everything then. About Marcus and Sarah, about Claire's cruelty, about the patterns I discovered in our family's history of managing inconvenient truths. But looking at her face, I realized she already knew more than she was saying. Maybe not the specifics, but the general shape of the problems everyone was working so hard to ignore. "I mean, that maybe some secrets are more harmful than others," I said finally. She nodded slowly. "Yes, I suppose they are." I spent the weekend crafting a letter I knew I might never send. It was addressed to Claire, written in my careful designer's handwriting on good paper, the kind of formal communication that couldn't be dismissed as an emotional outburst. "Dear Claire," it began, "I know about Marcus and Sarah Martinez. I have photographs, documentation, and testimony from Sarah herself, who believed she was dating a divorced man. I also know about the expensive gifts you can't afford on your legitimate income, and I suspect there are other secrets you're keeping from the family." I paused there, considering my options. The letter could go several directions: vindictive revenge, protective intervention, or something more strategic. After everything I'd learned about our family's patterns, I realized I had an opportunity to break the cycle rather than perpetuate it. "I'm not writing this to destroy your marriage or humiliate you," I continued. "I'm writing because I've spent 8 years being treated like a burden, a problem, someone whose existence makes everyone uncomfortable. Last week you told me I should stay away from family gatherings because my illness disrupts the perfect image you've all invested in. But the truth is, your marriage is the real disruption. Your secrets are the ones that should make everyone uncomfortable." The letter went on to detail what I knew, what I discovered, and what I suspected. But more importantly, it laid out my terms. "I want 3 things," I wrote. "First, a genuine apology for years of marginalization and the specific cruelty of last week's dinner. Second, acknowledgement from you and our parents that my illness doesn't make me less valuable as a family member. Third, honesty. If you want to keep your secrets, that's your choice. But you don't get to do it while scapegoating me for the family's discomfort with reality." I sealed the letter and put it in my desk drawer next to my notebook full of evidence. Having it written gave me clarity about what I actually wanted: not revenge, but recognition; not destruction, but honesty. But I also recognized that Claire might not respond well to an ultimatum, even a reasonable one. She'd spent years building her identity around being the family success story, and that identity was fundamentally threatened by both my recovery and the exposure of her own problems. I needed a backup plan. Over the following week, I quietly reached out to other family members, cousins, aunts, even some family friends who'd known us for years. I didn't reveal Marcus's affair, but I asked careful questions about family dynamics, about how they perceived my role in the family, about whether they'd noticed changes in Claire's behavior over the years. The responses were illuminating. Cousin Jenny admitted she'd always felt sorry for me because Claire and your parents act like you're made of glass. Aunt Susan mentioned that she'd noticed Claire seemed stressed and kind of mean lately, but had assumed it was work pressure. Even Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor who'd known us since childhood, Observe that Claire used to be such a sweet girl, but success seems to have hardened her somehow. What became clear was that other people had noticed the family dysfunction. But like me, they'd been trained not to talk about it directly. Everyone had learned to walk around the obvious problems, to pretend that Claire's treatment of me was protective rather than exclusionary, to assume that any family tension was somehow my fault for being sick. I also prepared practically. I researched the legal implications of Marcus's affair, not because I planned to get involved in their divorce proceedings, because I wanted to understand what Sarah might be facing if Claire decided to retaliate against her. I looked into the ethics policies at Marcus's school district, understanding that exposure could cost him his job. I even researched the gallery where Sarah worked, wanting to know if scandal might affect her professionally. The more I learned, the more I realized that my decision would have consequences far beyond my own family. Sarah was innocent in all of this, manipulated by someone who deliberately deceived her. Marcus, while guilty of the affair, was also caught in a dysfunctional marriage that seemed to be suffocating him. Even Claire, for all her cruelty toward me, was clearly struggling with pressures and dissatisfactions she felt she couldn't express. But I also realized that continuing to enable the family's pattern of secrecy and scapegoating wasn't protecting anyone. It was just prolonging everyone's misery. On Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after my conversation with Sarah, I made my decision. I called Claire and asked if we could have coffee together. Just the two of us, I said. There are some things we need to discuss. Her tone was wary, but she agreed. We arranged to meet Saturday morning at a cafe near her house-neutral territory, public enough to discourage a scene, but private enough for a serious conversation. As I hung up the phone, felt the same clarity I'd experienced in the restaurant parking lot when I'd first taken those photos for the first time in years. I wasn't protecting everyone else's comfort at the expense of my own truth. It was time to stop being the family's designated problem and start being a person with agency, boundaries, and demands of my own. I never made it to that coffee date with Claire. Friday evening, my phone started buzzing with text messages from an unknown number. The first few were innocuous enough that I almost deleted them as spam. But something about the tone made me read more carefully. Rebecca, this is Marcus Thompson. We need to talk. I know you've been asking questions about me. People have seen you at Sarah's gallery. Whatever you think you know, you're wrong. Sarah and I are just friends. The messages kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. I realized that someone, probably Sarah, had told him about our conversation. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, imagining the confrontation they must have had when she demanded the truth about his marriage. Please don't do anything rash. You don't understand the whole situation. Claire doesn't need to know about Sarah. It would destroy her. I made a mistake, but I'm handling it. Sarah and I are ending things. I stared at the messages, fascinated by Marcus's assumption that he could control the narrative, that he could somehow convince me to protect his secret. After 8 years of being managed and manipulated by my family, I recognized the tactics immediately. Instead of responding to his texts, I called him. Rebecca, he answered on the first ring, his voice strained. Thank God. We need to talk. Yes, we do, I said calmly. But not the way you think. Kai, know how this looks, but Sarah and I, Marcus, stop. I know exactly what you and Sarah are. I know you told her you were divorced. I know you've been lying to her for 6 months while being married to my sister. I know about the red sedan, the gallery meetings, the expensive gifts Claire's been receiving that don't match your teacher's salary. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. How long have you known? He asked finally. Long enough. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Rebecca, please. You have to understand my marriage to Claire is complicated. We've been having problems for years. I never meant for things with Sarah to go this far. But they did go that far. And now Sarah knows the truth about your marriage, and I know the truth about your affair. If you can't manage this away, Marcus, what do you want? The question came out raw, desperate. Money? I don't have much, but I don't want money. The suggestion offended me more than I'd expected. I want honesty. I want my family to stop treating me like I'm the problem when there are much bigger problems they're all ignoring. This isn't about you, Rebecca. This is between Claire and me. It became about me when my sister told me I should stay away from family gatherings because my illness makes everyone uncomfortable. It became about me when I realized you've been cheating on her while she's been scapegoating me for the families. Dysfunction, more silence. Then you're going to tell her. I'm going to tell everyone. The lies stop now, Marcus. All of them. Rebecca, wait, please. You don't understand what this will do to Claire. She's not as strong as she pretends to be. Her job is on the line. She's been under incredible pressure. Stop. Cut him off. Don't you dare try to make me responsible for protecting Claire's feelings. She had no problem destroying mine last week. But this is different. This will humiliate her publicly, okay? It could ruin her career, her relationships, like my illness was supposed to ruin mine, like I was supposed to just disappear so no one had to be uncomfortable. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. What if I leave her? What if I end the marriage myself? Make it clean. You wouldn't have to expose the affair. And what about Sarah? What about the fact that you've been lying to her, using her, making her complicit in something she never would have chosen if she'd known the truth? I'll make it right with Sarah. I'll explain, you'll explain what? That you're finally going to stop lying to her. Marcus, the damage is done. You've hurt two women, and you've done it while my family has been treating me like I'm the one who causes problems. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Marcus growing increasingly frantic as he realized I couldn't be bargained with, manipulated, or convinced to maintain his secret. He tried guilt, pleading, even veiled threats about how family revelations could hurt everyone, not just him and Claire, but I'd spent 8 years absorbing the family's dysfunction, being the designated problem so everyone else could feel normal. I was done protecting people who wouldn't protect me. I'm hanging up now, Marcus. Tomorrow, I'm having coffee with Claire and I'm telling her everything. After that, it's up to both of you to figure out how to handle the consequences of your choices. Rebecca, please. I ended the call and immediately blocked his number. Then I sat in my quiet apartment, surrounded by the designs I'd created during years of isolation, and felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. The clarity that comes from refusing to manage other people's problems while neglecting your own needs. My phone buzzed with more messages from different numbers. Marcus was trying to reach me any way he could. I turned it off and went to bed, sleeping better than I had in weeks. Saturday morning brought a text from my mother. Change of plans. Come for dinner tonight instead of meeting Claire for coffee. I'm making your favorite pot roast with all the sides. The whole family will be here. I stared at the message, recognizing the setup immediately. Marcus had clearly reached out to someone, probably my parents, spinning some version of events that positioned me as a threat to family harmony. This dinner wasn't about reconciliation. It was an intervention designed to contain whatever damage they thought I might cause. Perfect. I spent the afternoon preparing the meal I'd planned to serve them metaphorically, but now I could do it literally. I stopped at the grocery store and bought ingredients for Claire's favorite dessert, chocolate lava cake, and a nice bottle of wine. This was going to be a family confrontation. I wanted to look like someone who'd come in good faith. I also printed out the photos from my phone, organized my notebook, and prepared copies of everything for each family member. If they wanted to treat this like a family meeting, I'd come prepared with documentation. The house felt tense when I arrived, despite my mother's attempts at normalcy. She'd set the dining room table with the good china, lit candles, and prepared enough food for an army. Dad was in his recliner pretending to watch the news but clearly waiting for something to happen. Claire and Marcus sat on the couch, maintaining careful distance from each other, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Rebecca, Mom greeted me with forced cheerfulness. How wonderful that we could all get together. It feels like it's been ages since we had a proper family dinner. It has been ages, I agreed, setting my contributions on the kitchen counter. Ever since I was told my presence makes everyone uncomfortable. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Claire shot Marcus a look that could have shattered glass, confirming my suspicion that he'd told her about our phone conversation, but probably not the whole truth. Dinner conversation was stilted, full of the kind of small talk families use when they're avoiding larger issues. Dad talked about work. Mom mentioned neighbors we'd known since childhood. And Claire made pointed comments about being busy with important projects. Marcus barely spoke, pushing food around his plate and checking his phone constantly. I waited until Mom served the chocolate lava cake until everyone had something sweet in front of them to contrast with the bitter truth I was about to share. I wanted to thank everyone for gathering tonight, I said, raising my wine glass. It's not often we all make time for honest family conversation. Rebecca, Dad started, but I continued. I know Marcus spoke to some of you yesterday, probably telling you I was causing trouble, asking inappropriate questions, threatening family harmony. I looked around the table, watching their faces. He was right. I am going to disrupt our family harmony. Because our family harmony has been built on lies and scapegoating, and I'm done participating in that. Honey, Mom said carefully, maybe we should talk about this privately. No? Pulled out the manila folder I'd prepared and began distributing copies of the photos and documentation. We're going to talk about it right here, right now, as a family. Since family gatherings are apparently where we address problems. Claire's face went white as she saw the first photo Marcus embracing Sarah outside the restaurant. What is this evidence that your husband has been having an affair for the past 6 months with Sarah Martinez, an art gallery curator who believed she was dating a divorced man? I kept my voice calm, factual. Marcus has been lying to both of you, using money from sources I haven't identified to buy expensive gifts and maintain a double life. The explosion was immediate and predictable. Claire rounded on Marcus, who began a stammering defense about misunderstandings and complications. My parents tried to restore order, demanding explanations and calling for calm, but I wasn't finished. There's more, I said, raising my voice above the chaos. Sarah is innocent in this. She had no idea Marcus was married. When I told her the truth, she was devastated. She's been manipulated and lied to by someone she trusted. You told her? Claire's voice was shrill with panic. T. You told some stranger about our private business? T. I told her the truth about the man she was dating. Yes, 'cause she deserved to know. Just like you deserve to know. I looked directly at Claire, just like I deserved honesty from my family instead of being treated like a burden and told to stay away from family gatherings. This is completely different, Claire started. No, it's not. It's exactly the same. It's about lies and secrets and deciding who gets to know the truth and who gets to live with deception. You've been lying to everyone about your marriage while scapegoating me for making the family uncomfortable. But I'm not the one with the uncomfortable secret, Claire. You are. Marcus finally found his voice. Rebecca, you're destroying my marriage. My career, you destroyed your marriage when you started cheating. You destroyed your career when you violated the trust of 2 women and decided to solve your problems with deception instead of honesty. The arguing continued for another hour, with my parents attempting to mediate while Claire and Marcus turned on each other and occasionally united to blame me for exposing their problems. But I sat quietly through most of it, watching the family. Dynamics I'd endured for years finally played out in the open. When Claire finally screamed, "This is all your fault. You're jealous because I have a life and you don't." I knew we'd reached the heart of it. You're right, I said calmly. I am jealous. I'm jealous that you get to have problems without being treated like the family burden. I'm jealous that when your life is messy, everyone rushes to protect you. But when mine is messy, I get told to stay home. I'm jealous that your secrets get kept while my reality gets dismissed. I stood up from the table, leaving the photos and documentation scattered across Mom's good china. I'm not destroying anything that wasn't already broken. I'm just refusing to be the family member who pretends everything is fine while absorbing everyone else's dysfunction. As I reached for my purse to leave, Claire's voice cut through the dining room like a blade. You want to know the truth, Rebecca? Fine. Here's the truth. She yanked her wedding ring off her finger and threw it across the room, where it hit the wall with a sharp ping before rolling under the china cabinet. I've known about Marcus and his little art gallery girlfriend for 2 months. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Marcus, who'd been preparing another defense, stared at her in shock. You knew? Mom whispered. Of course I knew. I'm not stupid. The late nights, the mysterious meetings, the sudden interest in culture. Claire laughed bitterly. Please? I hired a private investigator in March. I have photos of my own, detailed reports, even financial records showing where he's been spending money. I sank back into my chair, realizing the conversation had just taken a turn I hadn't anticipated. Then why didn't you Dad start it? Why didn't I leave him? Why didn't I confront him? Because, unlike some people in this family, I understand the value of strategic thinking. Claire's eyes blazed as she looked around the table. Do you have any idea what a messy divorce would do to my career? My company is conservative, traditional. Having a cheating husband reflects poorly on my judgment, my ability to manage my personal life. So you just ... allowed it? Mom's voice was faint, with disbelief. I've been documenting everything, building a case, waiting for the right moment to act. A moment when I could control the narrative, minimize the damage, and come out looking like the wronged party instead of the woman who couldn't keep her husband satisfied. Marcus found his voice. Claire, you never said we never talked about what was there to talk about? She turned on him with years of suppressed fury. You wanted out of our marriage. Fine. But you were going to do it on my terms, at my timing, in a way that protected my reputation. But you've been so cold, so distant. I've been planning, Marcus. Something you've never been good at. If you think with your emotions, you're immediate. Desires? I think about consequences, about the bigger picture. I watched this revelation unfold, understanding that I'd stumbled into something far more complex than a simple affair. Claire hadn't been the unknowing victim. She'd been orchestrating her own revenge while maintaining her perfect facade. So when Rebecca came to you with her evidence, Dad said slowly, you already knew everything she was going to tell you. Okay? More than she knew, actually. Claire's smile was sharp. Did you know about the credit cards Marcus opened without my knowledge? The money he borrowed against his pension. The fact that he's been telling his girlfriend he's planning to move to Portland with her next summer? All eyes turned to Marcus, who looked like he might be sick. I've been building the perfect divorce case, Claire continued. Adultery, financial deception, emotional abandonment. I would have come out of this looking like a victim who deserved sympathy and support. Instead, Rebecca decided to play detective and ruin everything. I was trying to help. I started. You were trying to hurt me. Claire's composure finally cracked completely. You've resented me for years because I'm successful, because I'm healthy, because I didn't let your illness define my life the way you let it define yours. So when you saw a chance to destroy my marriage publicly, to humiliate me in front of the family, you took it. That's not true, isn't it? You could have come to me privately. You could have talked to Marcus directly. Instead, you went to his girlfriend, told a complete stranger our family business, and then orchestrated this dramatic revelation because you wanted to watch me suffer. The accusation hit harder than I'd expected because there was a grain of truth in it. I had wanted Claire to experience consequences for her cruelty. I had wanted her to understand what it felt like to be vulnerable, exposed, judged by the family. But I'd also wanted justice, truth, an end to the secrets that had been poisoning all of us. You told me to stay away from family gatherings because my illness makes everyone uncomfortable, I said quietly. You made me feel like I was the problem, like my existence was a burden on everyone I love. So yes, when I discovered that your perfect marriage was a lie, I wanted you to experience what it feels like to be the family member with the inconvenient truth. And look what you've accomplished. Claire gestured around the table at our parents. Shocked faces, Marcus's misery, the photos and documentation scattered among the dinner dishes. Everyone's uncomfortable now. Everyone's burdened by inconvenient truths. Are you happy? I looked around the table at my parents who were struggling to process revelations about both of their daughters that challenged everything they thought they knew. At Marcus, who was facing the consequences of months of deception. At Claire, whose careful planning had been derailed by my need for honesty. No, I said finally. I'm not happy, but I'm not ashamed anymore either. And that's worth something. Claire stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in her expression. Not anger or resentment, but something like recognition. You know what the worst part is? She said, her voice suddenly tired. You're right. About the family dynamics, about the scapegoating. about all of it. I did let you become the designated problem because it was easier than admitting I had problems of my own. The admission hung in the air between us, fragile and precious and completely unexpected. I left my parents' house that night knowing that everything had changed, but uncertain about what would come next. The last image I had was of Claire and Marcus sitting on opposite ends of the couch, my parents between them like referees, everyone trying to figure out how to move forward from the wreckage of revealed truths. My phone started ringing before I even got home. The first call was from Aunt Susan, who'd apparently received a panicked call from Mom. "Rebecca, honey, what happened at dinner? Your mother is beside herself." Then Cousin Jenny. "Is it true about Marcus and Claire?" Mom got a call from Aunt Linda, who heard from your dad that there was some kind of confrontation. Then Mrs. Henderson from next door. "Dear, I couldn't help but notice all the shouting earlier. Is everyone all right?" I turned my phone to silent and let them all go to voicemail. I needed time to process what had happened, to understand the full scope of what I'd set in motion over the next few days. The family telephone network lit up like a switchboard during a crisis. I received calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, all wanting to know the real story about what had happened at dinner. The narrative was shifting and changing as it passed from person to person. Some versions had me as the villain, who'd destroyed a marriage out of jealousy. Others cast me as the hero who'd exposed important truths. What became clear was that my family's dirty laundry was now public knowledge, at least within our extended circle. The carefully maintained image of Claire and Marcus as the perfect couple was shattered. And by extension, the image of our family as having everything figured out was crumbling too. By Wednesday, I'd received 3 different versions of events, from 3 different family members, none of which matched what had actually happened. The story was becoming mythology shaped by each person's need to make sense of the disruption. Claire, according to Mom, had moved back in with our parents, temporarily while she figured things out. Marcus had been staying at a colleague's house, apparently trying to decide whether to fight for his marriage or pursue his relationship with Sarah. My parents were devastated, but also proud of Rebecca for standing up for herself. Depending on which relative you talk to, the most surprising call came Thursday evening from Sarah. "Rebecca," she said when I answered, "I know this might be strange, but I wanted to thank you. Thank me for telling me the truth about Marcus, for treating me like I deserved to know what I was really involved in." Her voice was steady, but I could hear the exhaustion underneath. "He came to see me after your family dinner. He wanted to explain, to apologize, to convince me to wait for him while he worked things out with Claire." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that I don't date married men, even unhappily married men, even men whose wives supposedly know about their affairs. I told him that if he wanted to be with me, he needed to get his life sorted out first, honestly and completely, without using me as his motivation or his escape route." I found myself smiling. Good for you. It wasn't easy. I really did care about him, about who I thought he was. But you helped me understand that the person I fell for was partly fiction. It's created to get what he wanted without dealing with the consequences of his choices. We talked for almost an hour that night. Sarah told me about ending things with Marcus, about the awkwardness at work when mutual acquaintances started asking questions, about her decision to be honest with her friends about what had happened rather than hiding it in shame. "I've never been the other woman before," she said. "Swore I never would be. But Marcus made it so easy to believe his story, to think I was helping someone escape an unhappy situation rather than contributing to it." "You were manipulated," I reminded her. "That's not your fault." But it's taught me something important about trusting my instincts." There were signs I ignored because I wanted to believe what he was telling me. By Friday, I realized I needed to set some boundaries around the family chaos. I'd started something that had taken on a life of its own, and while I didn't regret revealing the truth, I also couldn't let it consume my life indefinitely. I wrote a short email to the family members who'd been calling. "I appreciate everyone's concern about recent events. What happened at dinner was necessary but difficult for all involved. I need some space to process everything, so I won't be available for family discussions about the situation for the next few weeks. When I'm ready to talk, I'll reach out then." I blocked the numbers of family members who couldn't respect that boundary. including my parents when Dad called 3 times in one day wanting to mediate between Claire and me for the first time in 8 years. I was setting limits on how much family dysfunction I would absorb. It felt strange and liberating and slightly terrifying. I spent the weekend working on client projects, taking long walks, and thinking about what I wanted my life to look like going forward. The family crisis would eventually resolve itself in some way, but I couldn't let it derail the progress I'd made in my own healing and independence. On Sunday evening, as I was finishing a logo design for a new client, I realized that I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd hurt Claire or exposed Marcus, but because I'd stopped carrying the weight of everyone else's secrets and dysfunction. I was no longer the family's designated problem. I was just Rebecca, dealing with my own life, making my own choices, setting my own boundaries. It was a revelation. The thank you card arrived on Tuesday, 2 weeks after the family dinner explosion. It was elegant, understated, the kind of card someone with good taste would choose for a significant occasion. Sarah's handwriting was as graceful as her gallery curation. Dear Rebecca, it read, "Thank you for your honesty and courage. Because of our conversation, I've made some important changes in my life. I hope we can stay in touch. With gratitude, Sarah." Inside was her business card with a personal note written on the back. "Coffee, sometime. I'd love to hear more about your design work." It was the beginning of an unexpected friendship. Sarah and I met the following Saturday at a cafe in the Arts District, and what started as a tentative conversation between two women who'd been caught in Marcus's web of deception became something much richer. Sarah had spent the 2 weeks since our family dinner doing her own soul-searching. She'd been honest with her friends about the situation, had started therapy to understand why she'd ignored the warning signs about Marcus's story, and had even used the experience to curate a new exhibition about truth and deception in contemporary art. "Your willingness to tell me the truth, even when it was uncomfortable, made me realize how much I value honesty in relationships," she told me. "I've been thinking about how often we protect people from realities they have a right to know." It was exactly the kind of conversation I'd been craving for years. Thoughtful, direct, unafraid of complexity or difficult emotions. Through Sarah, I met other people in the arts community who were interested in my design work. The gallery world, I discovered, was full of small businesses and independent artists who needed branding, promotional materials, and websites. Sarah introduced me as a brilliant designer who understands authentic storytelling. And suddenly, I had more client referrals than I could handle. More importantly, I found myself part of a community that valued creativity, authenticity, and honest conversation. These were people who talked openly about their struggles with mental health, financial pressures, and family dysfunction. They didn't treat my lupus like an uncomfortable secret or a burden. They treated it like one aspect of my life that informed my perspective but didn't define my worth. The support came from unexpected quarters within my family, too. Cousin Jenny called 3 weeks after the dinner to apologize. "I've been thinking about what you said about family patterns and scapegoating," she told me. "I realized I've been doing it too, treating you like you were fragile instead of just dealing with a medical condition. I'm sorry, Rebecca. You've been stronger than any of us gave you credit for." Aunt Susan sent a text that simply said, "Proud of you for speaking your truth. Love you." Even Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor, stopped me on the sidewalk one day to say, "I always thought that sister of yours was too hard on you, dear. Sometimes families need someone brave enough to shake things up." The most surprising support came from an unexpected source. Marcus's colleague at the high school, David Chen, no relation, despite the shared last name, was the drama teacher who'd become friends with Marcus over their shared interest in debate and public speaking. He reached out through the school's website contact form after hearing about the situation through the teacher grapevine. "I wanted you to know that several of us at school have been concerned about Marcus for months," he wrote. "He's been distracted, anxious, and frankly, not himself. Some of us suspected there was something going on at home, but we didn't know how to help. What you did took courage, and it probably prevented a much messier situation down the road." The validation from someone who knew Marcus professionally but had no stake in protecting my family's image meant more than I'd expected. It confirmed That my decision to reveal the truth hadn't been vindictive or destructive, it had been necessary. Not everyone was supportive, of course. Some family members clearly blamed me for the chaos that followed the revelation. One received a few cold shoulders at the grocery store from family friends who'd heard distorted versions of events. But for the first time in my adult life, I had allies who understood that sometimes truth-telling looks like destruction from the outside, but is actually the beginning of healing. My business grew during this period in ways I hadn't anticipated. Word spread about my work through Sarah's network, and I found myself designing materials for galleries, independent theaters, and small arts nonprofits. The work was meaningful, creative, and well paid. I was finally able to contribute to conversations about professional success without feeling like I was making excuses for my limitations. Most importantly, I discovered that I had more energy for everything when I wasn't constantly managing other people's emotions and secrets. The mental exhaustion that had plagued me for years, which I'd attributed entirely to lupus, lessened significantly once I stopped being the family's emotional caretaker. 3 weeks after the dinner, I received a letter from Claire. Not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter delivered to my mailbox. The fact that she'd taken the time to write it by hand, to choose her words carefully, suggested that whatever she had to say was important to her. I carried it inside, unopened, made myself a cup of tea, and sat in my reading chair before breaking the seal. Whatever Claire had written, I wanted to be prepared for it. Claire's letter was 3 pages long, written in the careful handwriting I remembered from our childhood when she'd helped me with thank you notes after birthdays. Her words were measured, thoughtful, and completely unlike the defensive anger she'd shown at the family dinner. "Dear Rebecca," it began, "I've been in therapy for the past month, trying to understand how our family got to the point where we needed an explosion to have an honest conversation. Dr. Williams has helped me see patterns I didn't want to acknowledge, both in how I've treated you and in how I've handled my own problems." The letter went on to detail Claire's recognition of the family dysfunction we'd all participated in, the scapegoating, the secret-keeping, the way problems were either buried or projected onto the designated difficult family member. She acknowledged that my illness had become a convenient explanation for any family tension, allowing everyone else to avoid examining their own contributions to the dysfunction. "I know I hurt you terribly when I said your illness made everyone uncomfortable," she wrote. "The truth is, my problems made me uncomfortable, and it was easier to blame you than to face my own issues. I've been unhappy in my marriage for years, struggling with work pressures I felt I couldn't admit, and dealing with financial stress that I was ashamed to acknowledge. Making you the family problem meant I didn't have to be vulnerable about my own struggles." She also detailed what had happened in the weeks since our confrontation. Marcus had moved out permanently and was staying with Rebecca Chen, the drama teacher, while they figured out divorce logistics. Claire had been honest with her employer about the situation and discovered that her fears about professional consequences had been largely unfounded. Her boss was more concerned about her well-being than her marital status. "I'm learning to be honest about my limitations and needs," she continued. "It's something you've been doing for years that I never appreciated. Managing a chronic illness while building a career and maintaining relationships requires a kind of strength I never recognized." The most surprising part of the letter was her description of the new business cards she'd had printed. Claire had left her high-pressure marketing job and started her own consulting firm, specializing in helping small businesses develop authentic brand messages. She was working fewer hours for less money, but she was happier and more fulfilled than she'd been in years. "I realize you've been building the kind of life I envied, work that matters to you, relationships based on honesty, boundaries that protect your well-being," she wrote. "I was so focused on maintaining an image of success that I lost track of what actually made me happy." She ended with an invitation. "I'd like to have coffee with you sometime, if you're willing. Not to apologize again, though I am sorry, but to see if we can build a different kind of relationship. One based on who we actually are rather than who we think we should be." I read the letter twice, feeling a complex mix of emotions: relief, sadness, hope, and something that might have been forgiveness. Claire's words felt genuine in a way that her previous apologies had not. She wasn't asking me to forget what had happened or pretend it hadn't been harmful. She was acknowledging the reality of our family dysfunction and taking responsibility for her part in it. The coffee meeting happened 2 weeks later. We met at the same cafe where I'd first talked with Sarah, and the conversation was careful but real. Claire looked different, less polished, more relaxed. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual designer clothes. And her hair was longer, less severely styled. "I fired my hairdresser," she said when I mentioned it. "Turns out I was spending $300 a month on a cut that made me look like someone I wasn't." We talked about her therapy, my business growth, and the ways our family was slowly adjusting to the new normal. Mom and Dad were in counseling too, trying to understand how they'd contributed to the patterns that had hurt both of their daughters. Family gatherings were smaller, more honest, and less focused on maintaining perfect appearances. "Marcus sends his regards," Claire said as we were finishing our coffee. "He's been working with a therapist too, trying to understand why he chose deception over honest communication about his unhappiness." "How are you doing with the divorce?" "Better than I expected. It turns out ending a marriage that wasn't working is less devastating than pretending everything is fine when it isn't." She smiled wryly. "Who knew? We didn't become best friends overnight." Years of dysfunction and hurt don't disappear because of one honest conversation. But we began talking regularly, carefully rebuilding trust and learning to relate to each other as adults rather than as the roles we'd played in our family drama. The most significant change was in how our parents treated me. The combination of my improved health and my refusal to accept the role of family problem had shifted their perception of me completely. They began asking about my work with genuine interest, including me in decisions about family events, and treating my lupus as a medical condition I managed rather than a defining limitation. I expanded my design business that fall, moving to a larger home office and hiring a part-time assistant to help with client communications and project management. For the first time since my diagnosis, I was building something that felt sustainable and fulfilling. The new business cards I ordered reflected this confidence. Rebecca Chen Design, authentic visual, storytelling for purpose-driven organizations. No mention of limitations, accommodations, or apologies. It's just a clear statement of what I offered and why it mattered. The apartment lease I signed 6 months later represented more than just a change of address. The space was bigger, brighter, and located in the arts district where I'd found my new community. It had enough room for a proper design studio, a guest bedroom for the friends I was finally making, and a kitchen where I could host dinner parties without worrying about energy levels or lupus. Flare-upstot for the first time in 8 years. I was planning a life around possibility rather than limitation. The apartment warming party I threw was small but meaningful. Sarah came, of course, along with several other artists and small business owners I'd met through the gallery. David Chen brought his partner, and even Dr. Martinez stopped by with her wife to see how her longtime patient was doing. Claire came too, bringing a bottle of wine and a small potted plant for my windowsill. She seemed comfortable in the space, admiring the design work displayed on my walls and engaging easily with my friends. Watching her laugh at something Sarah said, I realized how much more relaxed she'd become since ending her marriage and leaving her high-pressure job. "I like your people," she told me as the evening was winding down. "They're real." My parents had been invited but declined, which I understood. They were still adjusting to the idea that I had a full life independent of family gatherings. Their absence didn't hurt the way it might have a year earlier. 'Twas simply information about where they were in their own growth process. The most significant change was in how I talked about my lupus. Instead of minimizing it or apologizing for it, I discussed it matter-of-factly when relevant. I explained to new clients that I managed a chronic condition that occasionally affected my schedule, and I built buffer time into my project timelines to accommodate potential flare-ups. Most people appreciated the honesty and planning. I also started speaking about my experience at support groups for people with chronic illnesses, not as someone who'd overcome lupus that wasn't possible, but as someone who'd learned to build a meaningful life while managing an unpredictable condition. My story resonated particularly with people who'd been struggling with family relationships and professional challenges related to their health. The illness isn't the problem, I'd tell groups. The problem is when everyone around you treat your illness like it defines your worth or capabilities. Sarah and I had become genuine friends, bonding over our shared experience of learning to trust our instincts and set healthy boundaries. She'd ended up dating David Chen's partner's brother, a sustainable relationship built on honesty from the beginning. Watching her navigate that new romance with the wisdom she gained from the Marcus situation was beautiful to see. Marcus himself had moved to Portland as planned, but alone. He'd found a teaching position there and was apparently doing well, though I only heard about him occasionally through Claire. His relationship with Sarah had taught him things about honesty and communication that he was working to integrate into his new life. The family dynamics continued to evolve slowly. Holiday gatherings were smaller, more authentic, and less focused on performance. We talked about real things, work challenges, health concerns, relationship struggles instead of maintaining elaborate pretenses. It wasn't always comfortable, but it was honest. I began dating again, something I hadn't seriously attempted since my diagnosis. The difference was that I approached relationships with clarity about my needs, boundaries, and non-negotiables. I was upfront about my health condition, my work demands, and my family history. It filtered out people who weren't ready for authentic connection, but it also attracted people who valued honesty and depth. One evening in spring, almost a year after the family dinner confrontation, I was working in my studio when my phone rang. It was Mom, calling to tell me that Claire had been featured in a local business magazine for her success as an independent consultant. The article mentioned how much she's learned about authentic branding from watching other successful entrepreneurs, Mom said. She specifically talked about you, about how your design work reflects genuine passion and integrity. After we hung up, I thought about the journey that had brought us all to this point. The explosive dinner, the difficult conversations, the gradual rebuilding of relationships on more honest foundations. None of it had been easy, but all of it had been necessary. I pulled out the old medical bracelet from my jewelry box, the one from my first hospital stay that had once symbolized everything that had changed in my life. Now it represented something different, a reminder that crisis can be the beginning of transformation, that speaking truth can shatter comfortable lies, and that sometimes the person everyone treats as the problem is actually the person brave enough to name the real problems. I put the bracelet back in the drawer and returned to my work designing materials for a nonprofit that helped families navigate chronic illness while maintaining healthy relationships. It was meaningful work that drew on everything I'd learned about resilience, honesty, the courage to demand better from the people who claim to love you. The sunset through my studio windows painted everything golden. And for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace with who I was, what I'd survived, and what I was building. My illness would always be part of my story, but it was no longer the only part, or even the most important part. I was Rebecca Chen, successful designer, loyal friend, truth teller, and woman who'd learned to set boundaries that protected both her health and her heart. The family's designated problem had become the family's catalyst for healing, and that transformation had freed everyone to become more authentic versions of themselves. As the light faded and the city lights began to twinkle, I smiled and kept working, surrounded by the life I'd finally learned to claim as my own.